Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama.
Hare Krishna, I am Rajarsi Dasa. Welcome to Hare Krishna today. On today's program, I have a special guest with me, His Grace Abhiram1, one of the early disciples of His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. Abhiram Prabhu, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Devarshi.
So, we would like to hear from you a bit about your life before coming to Krishna consciousness.
Well, I was born in the United States, in the Midwest. My father was an engineer in the auto industry, and our family were a Catholic family. So at an early age, I began studying the Catholic catechisms, the Catholic philosophy. And I started to believe that I should become a priest. Of course, in the old Catholic families and the traditional Catholic families, it was expected that every good family would give either one daughter to become a nun,
Okay.
or one son to become a priest.
Interesting.
And that was the tendency in our family. I had a number of aunties who were nuns and some uncles who were priests.
Okay.
So I had a very strong desire to connect with God. And I used to study very diligently the Catholic theology. I even began attending some weekend retreats in the seminary school, which is where the priests are actually trained. After a short time, I started to feel uncomfortable with the philosophy. Because I found that although it was certainly a spiritual orientation, there was a tendency to require the intelligence to close and to just accept what was dictated by the Holy See, by the Church in Rome. And my real questions about the soul, about the possibility of reincarnation, which seemed quite obvious to me, were not being answered. Rather, I was being told that this is the theology of the Catholic Church, and you must accept it. You must have faith. You shouldn't question it. And that the Church itself would guarantee your spiritual success in life. So somehow that was not a satisfactory answer for me. I really felt a need to dig deeper, to understand more. I began to probe and read very broadly. I began to read books from the East. My mother, when I was 14 years old, she gifted me for Christmas the main philosophy book of India, which is Bhagavad Gita.
Was she Catholic also?
She was Catholic. She was the core of our family in terms of religiosity. But being a truly, spiritually and religious person, my mother was not restricted and did not want to see me restricted when my heart was calling for something more. So
she thought that a fitting gift.
So she, in fact, yes, gave me the what you can call the Bible of India, which is the Bhagavad Gita.
Interesting.
I began reading this, and I started to actually hold classes with my school friends. We would turn the lights off and put candles on and burn incense and play. At the time, we didn't have Indian music. We had some Japanese flute music. So we would play that in the background, and I would read the Gita, and I would give my thoughts and my ideas. So
what age were you at that time?
I was 14.
Okay.
Now that progressed my interest in the East. But of course, in America in those days, there was an immigration policy against Indians immigrating into America. I mean, there must have been restrictions on many countries, but India was one of those countries. I'm talking about the early 60s.
Okay.
So we really didn't have contact with people from India. And that was just the beginning when a few gurus had started to come across. But it was hardly having much impact in those days. So I started to move with my generation as I grew older in a general dissatisfaction with the way our government and the way our society was defining our life and our future. And of course, all of you know that there was quite a youth revolution in the 60s. Unfortunately, there was no real knowledge or guidance about how to properly revolutionize or improve society or government. So the young people of the United States and many other countries tried various ways which did not result in much benefit. But at that time, my spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, he came to the United States in 1965, right in the heart of the youth rebellion, the youth revolution of the 60s. And I knew in my heart for many years that I was seeking somebody who would guide me in spiritual life. It was a natural feeling in my heart.
The Bhagavad Gita you had, did that happen to be Srila Prabhupada's translation commentary?
No.
Oh, it wasn't.
This was before Srila Prabhupada's translation was published. This was the Issuewood.
So, what was your first encounter with Srila Prabhupada or his teachings or whatever?
Well, as I grew older, I started to delve further into the philosophies of the East, and I began to attend various yoga study groups and read Yogananda's lovely book, The Autobiography of a Yogi, which is a very beautiful book, and I think it's inspired many people through the years. But again, that did not really give me the full idea of how I could transform my life in the way that Yogananda had done.
Okay.
I still felt a hunger for more guidance, for deeper and more elaborate understanding of this very rich tradition of spiritual development which we see coming out of India. So in 1969, I was continuing to seek and seriously reading many books from the East and attending different yoga group sessions, still not feeling that I'd found a direction. I was praying very intensely. I remember one winter day in Detroit City. If you haven't been to the cold North Country, you've certainly seen it on television. And there are days in the north, in the winter, when the sun doesn't show. For days and days on end, it's covered by a haze of clouds. And it's frigid cold where your bones feel cold. I remember one such day I was looking out the window of my apartment in Detroit. I was 4 floors up, and I was looking down at the street. It was covered in fresh snow. It was a gray sky. And there was no one on the street, not a car, not a person, except one old lady who had the cloth wrapped around her head, which is called babushka. She had a long woolen coat, and she had rubber boots, and she was carrying a bag of groceries. And she was trudging, just laboring through the snow with her head and shoulders bent from a long life. And I felt in my heart that this person is symbolically me. This person is symbolically my soul, trudging in the material world, alone, in the cold, in the gray, with no wonderful destination ahead of me. And in that moment, I cried out in my heart, "Oh God, whatever I have to do, whatever I have to know or see or learn, I'm ready for it. But please, show me the way forward."
That's interesting.
Now the next day, I was sitting in my sunroom, meditating on this condition. And my dear friend came to visit me, but he noticed that I was in meditation and prayer. So he didn't enter the sunroom. Rather, he slid a small pamphlet under the door, which he had received on the street that day. Now, he had received that pamphlet, I didn't know it at the time, from the devotees of the Hare Krishna movement. And at this time, please understand, I did not know that there was a Hare Krishna movement. I didn't know that they had a guru. I had no idea. This was 1969. It was a very early stage of our guru's preaching. But I picked up that book, and it was titled Krishna, the Reservoir of Pleasure. And I opened the first leaf. And on the inner leaf was a small photo of our guru in a side profile, a rather stern look on his face, looking up at the sky. And in that moment that I saw his photo, I could see the character on his face. I could see the dignity and the sublime sense of peace that radiated from his, actually from his facial structure and his countenance, the way that he held himself. And in a moment, I just knew in my heart that this was the man that I had been looking for. I didn't know he was a guru. I didn't know. I assumed he was the author of that book, since he was on the inner flap. But I had no idea that he had an organization, that he had an entire lifestyle to propose, that he was leading a small revolution, a spiritual revolution, and seeking people who would like to transform their life in a magical and dramatic way, back towards a deep connection with the Divine Lord. Still in that moment, seeing his face, I made a commitment in my heart that I will follow this man. He will be my life mission, to follow this man. Such was the impact of just seeing his face. Now, I don't recommend that people should go about the world looking for some magical face. In fact, one should question very diligently and clear his doubts. But since you've asked me, I'm telling you the truth. This was my personal experience.
I can relate to that, because I could tell you that my experience was just like that. I mean, I was reading a Bible every day, but I was just praying that, my dear God, if I ever know the truth, I promise I'll live by that. That was a type of urge, and it went on for about a week, this type of prayer. And then I got this Bhagavad Gita as it is. And it's just like you. I never knew about any Hare Krishna movement or the Guru or anything. But when I got the Gita, I saw the greatest exponent of Krishna consciousness in the Western world. And I just read that book for 1 week. And I was in a Hare Krishna ashram. So I can relate to your point, the point that
this
you
is an amazing serendipity, because it actually happened to me like that. When I got that book, I went to see some friends who I respected, who were also deep thinkers. And they had nothing to do with Krishna consciousness. So I drove for 2 hours to their house at University of Michigan. And when I arrived, Eric, who was the friend, he came out and he said, "Haribol!" He had also become affected by the teachings of Swami Prabhupada.
Unknowing to you.
I didn't even know what Haribol meant. I had no idea. It means chant Hare Krishna. And he said, "Come in." And Adele, his wife, he said, "My wife Adele will cook prasadam and we'll have a kirtan." I said, "Okay." I had no idea what he was talking about.
Mm.
This was this very next day from receiving the brochure.
Wow.
So then he told me that in the next day there's a Sunday program at the temple, which I had no idea there was a temple. So I attended that. In that meeting, I met one very nice devotee, Narottam, and he gave me his Gita from Srila Prabhupada to borrow. I took it home and I read it for 1 week. Day and all day, I studied that book, cover to cover, reviewing the verses again and again, doing nothing else. I didn't attend office, I didn't do anything else. I just studied that book. And at the end of the week, I realized that this was complete. Everything was there. Of course, it required a lifetime of study and understanding to fully unpack all of the rich wisdom and knowledge that was contained there. But I was fully convinced and enthused that my life would now change in the way that I wished it to change.
But there was a phenomena, because Srila Prabhupada he started a society in 66 and he passed away in 77. So for him to impact the lives of so many people, create such an impact on, in people's life all over the world, would you say that the type of experience you had, would you say that a lot of people had that type of experience also?
Many people have told me that they've had some type of very strong epiphany in coming into contact with the chanting of Hare Krishna and the spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, and his teachings. So I would say that we would credit that strong radiance and charisma in the person of Swami Prabhupada to having such a strong impact worldwide. And I of course did spend some years with him in India, and I can testify that he was an extraordinary person who impacted everyone that he came in touch with. Not everyone, of course, became his disciple. The majority of people that he would meet in life would not be destined to become his disciples. But nevertheless, they were impacted.
Tell us something about, being from America. How did this teaching, did you, you had experience of people coming in contact with Krishna, did you, how did you see Americans receiving and accepting this? Because to me, seeing temple, deities, Rathayatra festival, it's difficult for me to comprehend. How come thousands of people were following a Rathayatra procession? So tell me something about, did they have some knowledge or what was it?
No. In fact, as I had mentioned earlier, we had no knowledge of India in America. Somehow there was almost an isolation. One part of it was that there was an immigration policy which did not really allow. There were few professors in universities, a few doctors, but maybe 1,000 Indians that I could guess in the whole country at the time. They just were not allowed in the early 60s and 50s. And so we really didn't have interaction with India, and there wasn't much information available in either our school books or the television or media. So it was a shocking cultural, it was a surprise culturally to Americans to see people wearing Indian clothes and chanting apparently Indian mantras and looking very joyful in doing so. But it was a time in America when people realized that something was missing. You know, the 1950s, 1960s, the United States of America had achieved a level of prosperity and stability which had probably not been achieved by many societies in the history of men. Perhaps there was a period during Roman Empire, perhaps there were a few other empires which achieved such prosperity and such stability. But certainly, in our recent modern times, the 50s and 60s of the United States of America was an extraordinarily prosperous and stable time. So you would have thought that as children of that society, we would have thought, well, our life is made. We just go on and do like our fathers, and we'll live a happy life. But no. There was something very clearly missing. And that was the spiritual element. The souls and the hearts of the young people of America were yearning for something more.
Tell me something about this. Srila Prabhupada traveling all over the world, he was behind this point that you have to know your identity, that if you don't know your identity, then you won't know what you're supposed to do. How much did that first lesson that we are not these bodies, how far did that go in, or what attracted so many people then? You know, would you say the teaching or the chanting, or what really made that penetrating effect so, you know, universal, so all over the world?
Well, there are two things I would refer to. One is that, of course, all religious traditions indicate that we are a spiritual entity and that we remain forever. We actually live forever as a spiritual entity. But no tradition in the world elaborates so scientifically, so thoroughly on exactly the nature of that soul and the nature of its position in this material and ultimately in its spiritual world. So there was a body of knowledge which thoroughly elaborated and enlightened one and made so much sense as to what we are, why we are in this condition, why we are suffering, which is a very big question. Alongside of that, the power of this mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. When celebrated, when sung, these names of God are extremely powerful to immediately begin moving the heart and moving the soul back together. There is a disconnect with our divine nature in this material existence, and when one begins to vibrate this very magical mantra, the heart and the soul, the mind and the intellect begin to find their proper position, and we begin to naturally understand that we are spiritual beings. It's an understanding, an intuition that becomes very palpable, very strong to experience by the vibrating of this mantra. So the mantra in combination with the elaborate scientific philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita make a phenomenal impact on changing one's entire perspective. When one begins to see where he is in this world and where he can go, when he begins to have a hope that he can go forward towards the divine, that brings a great joy and a great enthusiasm and a great optimism to one in life. So much so that everything else that we'd experienced in the past seems of no consequence.
Abhiram Prabhu, we've exhausted our time, but we're going to continue the subject matter in our following program. So I'd like to thank you very much for being on the program. I'd like to say Hare Krishna, and do join us again next week for a continuing presentation.
Krishna.